Assalamu alaikum. Still introductions, and I know some of these things are a bit annoying, but doesn't matter. We get to it so we can get to the end. We go through this fast so we can get to the interesting parts. I believe a lecture or two ago we were talking about the declarations are either actual or apparent. And the rational paradox is when they contradict each other, how can something be an obligation and forbidden at the same time, especially if we were to have this type of division, that there's an actual ruling and there's an apparent ruling, and it is very likely that the apparent ruling can contradict the actual ruling. However, we have a theory that says since the apparency of a rule has hujjiyah, has munajjiziyah and mu'adhariyah. That means basically you are excused for taking this action, though it may be wrong in actuality. And you have to take the action because the apparent evidence tells you to do so. So based on the apparency, if the apparency has a binding reality, then it becomes the actual ruling, so we could avoid the rational paradoxes. So now we still have two types of rulings. So we're ignoring the actual ruling, what it is in actuality. We don't even worry about that because there's no way to reach it, so we completely ignore it. So now we only have apparent rulings. Apparent rulings are divided into two. The first one is called amara. Amara is a procedure in which you have apparent evidence to deduce a ruling, such as a verse from the Quran, for example, or an authentic hadith, or ijma, or whatever evidences, which we're going to discuss all the evidences eventually. If we have an actual textual ruling, or if we have an actual actionable ruling, that gives us direct evidence that makes us discover what the ruling can be, then this is called amara. Such as it is a declaration, for example, it is an obligation for a person to fast in the month of Ramadan. Where did he get this from? We say we got it from the Quran because the Quran says, Ya ayyuha alladhina amanu kutiba alaykum as-siyam. O people who believe, fasting has been ordained upon you. Since we have this textual evidence, this way of getting the apparent ruling of obligation of fasting is considered an amara. And the majority of the rules, especially when it comes to obligations, that means it is wajib for you to do this. And when it comes to a prohibition, that means it is haram for you to do this, majority of them fall under amarat. That means these are rules that we have some sort of textual evidence that we can resort to that can discover what the ruling actually is. The second type of ruling is called practical procedures, or al-usool al-amaliyah. The usool al-amaliyah is we do not have an evidence. It means the evidence does not exist. So for example, if somebody were to ask a question, are you allowed to sit in the middle seat of an airplane? Now you could go through the Quran, the Sunnah, and you don't find any evidence. There's no textual evidence. But you would have to make a declaration. Why? Because every single action has a hukum. Because we have 5 types of ahkam. And every action can fall under these 5 types. So if we want to pull and deduce a hukum, when we look into the text, we don't find anything. So we use practical procedures. Practical procedures, basically, what you do is 2 things. Number 1, you change the question. Because the question is, are you allowed to sit in the middle seat of an airplane? You look into the text, there's nothing. So you could say there is no hukum on this. Or you could say, I don't know. Or you change the question. You change the question, you're going to change it. What is it that a person has to do when there is no evidence for an action that he wants to inquire about or he wants to take? In this circumstance, there have been many approaches to practical procedures. So practical procedures, we're not talking about the evidence at all. We are talking because there is a lack of evidence in the question. So the most popular opinion is that Sayyid Khoury is a very big proponent of, which is قبح العقاب بلا بيان. That means it is unjust for God to punish a person for doing an action without clarifying to him what his requirements of action is. So since there is no evidence, it automatically becomes halal and it is mubah and you're allowed to do it, because if it was haram, it should have been clarified. Since if it's not clarified, it makes no sense for you to be punished. That's number one. Number two is حق الطاعة, or أصالة الاحتياط, basically, which is that since you are at an impasse and you are in doubt what the action should be, you should take your precaution, because God has the right of obedience. And since there is a small chance that it may be forbidden, you stay away from it. In this case, everything is haram until you know it's halal. And there's a very strong argument towards it. They say if there's 100 cups of water and one of them is poisonous, would you drink from any of these 100 cups? So this is basically the argument. So since there's a chance that it might be forbidden, you stay away from it. The third one agrees with this principle, but says that there is textual evidence that we don't have to follow it. So in the rational principle, like Muhammad Baqir Sadr agrees with this principle 100%. He goes with Asalat al-Ihtiyat. This is his thing. He says God has the right of obedience, and so if we were to put a probability on something, no matter how small, that it may be haram, we would assume that it's haram, because we have to take the utmost precaution. However, there is a textual evidence. So there is an amara about doing these practical procedures. That means I change the question, what do I do when I don't have evidence, and I look into the Quran and look into the Sunnah, and I find a verse, for example, that says رُفِعَ مَا لَا يَعْلَمُونَ. What they do not know has been lifted. They have been forgiven from what they do not know. I can use this to make a hukum, a practical procedural hukum, but based on an amara and not based on a rational understanding of the evidence. قبح العقاب بلا بيان is a rational deduction. حق الطاعة is a rational deduction. But looking for a practical procedure from the Quran so you can know your practical action is basically a hybrid mode of doing these actions. Now the question is, if you are using the amara to come up with a practical procedure, is it still considered a practical procedure, or is it an amara in itself? So for example, same question, are you allowed to sit in the middle seat of a plane? The first one says قبح العقاب بلا بيان, and since there is no evidence, it is halal for you to sit on a plane, based on the rational evidence that it is unjust to punish a person without clarifying what his practical position must be. That's number one. Number two, Asalat al-Ihtiyat. Are you allowed to sit in the middle seat of an airplane? You say it's haram. Why? Yes, we don't have any evidence, but there is a chance that it might be, so stay away from it. Rational deduction, based on this principle. Third one, are you allowed to sit in the middle seat of an airplane? You say, yes, it is halal based on the textual evidence that رُفِعَ مَا لَا يَعْلَمُونَ, what they do not know has been lifted. And since we do not know, it has been lifted, and hence this is halal. Now, did we use a practical procedure, or is this deduction part of the amarat? Have fun with this question. We're not going to go through it, but that's it for now.